Do you ever ask yourself, am I playing too small? Have I left it too late to start afresh? Will I come to the end of my life and feel that I somehow let myself down? This is your invitation to hear from some amazing people who have asked themselves those very same questions and chose to wake the F up, to get off the hamster wheel of mediocrity and seize the life that was calling them. Be inspired and be challenged to discover who you have the potential to become and the contribution you're here to make. And now, here to guide you on the most important quest of your life is your host, Janet Hogan.
Living in Bali, I always thought of magic mushrooms and other psychedelics as those things surfers took after a day out on the waves, lying back on a sandy beach, watching the stars swirling around like a Van Gogh painting, up there with the usual party drugs, a bit risky, but essentially recreational. So when I heard about a summit being held in Byron Bay, Australia, dedicated to one of the key ingredients in magic mushrooms, psilocybin, and other substances like MDMA, and how they're being used in the medical domain to get people out of the deeper steps of depression, trauma, and anxiety, I was curious. So curious, I was determined to attend this summit, and lucky me, I managed to secure the very last ticket. But more intriguing than the potential of psychedelics to revolutionize the way we feel about ourselves were the two people leading the charge. Tanya de Jong, a feisty Australian soprano turned social entrepreneur, and her philanthropic husband, ex-investment banker, Peter Hunt. Now, I don't know about you, but when I think of investment bankers, I imagine high-earning people in suits, sitting at lacquered boardroom tables, in office towers, poring over spreadsheets, and generally oblivious to the day-to-day trials and tribulations of your average Joe. So lo and behold, there was Peter taking the stage at the symposium, filling the room with his passion to create change, major change in a field that has seen very little innovation in decades, but which is finally getting an increasing amount of media attention: mental health. In fact, so committed are Peter and Tanya to this cause, they've established Mind Medicine Australia, a very dynamic not-for-profit organisation born from a deep desire to help make these psychedelic therapies part of our medical system so that many more Australians suffering from debilitating mental illnesses like depression and post-traumatic stress disorder can get relief from their suffering and find peace within themselves. So it gives me the greatest pleasure to introduce you to Peter Hunt, the man who has swapped the boardrooms of Melbourne and Sydney for the very unboring realm of psychedelics and mental health. Peter, welcome to Wake the F Up.
Thank you very much, and thank you for that lovely introduction.
A well-earned one, Peter. Now, you describe yourself as lucky, which is kind of ironic given that your rise to the top of investment banking didn't follow the standard superhighway to success. Can you take us back to when you were living in England and share what happened to you as a young boy?
Yeah, I was brought up in a pretty conventional home with two loving parents in a country town in Sussex, and spent the first 14 years of my life there. So I say I had a very warm relationship with my father and mother, and they were both very supportive. My father was a businessman, and he portrayed himself as being successful. And then, really with no warning, he having gone away for the weekend to supposedly see his sister, he committed suicide. And I have to say that my world then just collapsed. But I was fortunate because I had an extraordinary mother who, despite the trauma she would have been going through, was determined to support me. And that's the first bit of luck. The second bit of luck was that we had relatives in Australia, and she decided to start life again by bringing me to Australia. And so as a 14-year-old, I came out as an assisted migrant, and I was lucky enough to go to an amazing school, and I was given opportunities that I wouldn't have believed possible as a young man. Even out of difficulties, opportunities arise in the right circumstances if you're lucky.
Yeah, well, you certainly, defied the odds in the success that you achieved. But it must have nonetheless had some kind of psychological impact on you, not just losing your father, but losing him to suicide. What was the price of that, Peter?
Oh, it was traumatic. I mean, I think the price was that I went into myself. So the normal social development that a teenager has, if I'm honest, probably didn't have. I became very insular, very shy. I didn't socialize in the way that normal teenagers did, and I used all my time to get educated. It's almost like subconsciously, I didn't want the insecurity that my father had. So I put all my efforts into educating myself, and I spent all the hours doing that rather than spending some of them doing what young people do and spend time with friends and making new friends. The benefit of that for me was that I discovered an inner strength. And it was that inner strength, together with my mother's support, that really carried me through. And gradually, I learned those social needs over time, but much later than I think most people would do because of what happened to me.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, how we can, compensate for things that have happened to us. Do you think your father's business failure, or that's probably how he saw it, it might not have been, but do you think that sense of failure is what propelled you to be successful in the investment banking sector?
I think that's part of it. I think also the insecurity of leaving England, leaving all my friends behind, knowing what it was like to be lonely, because I did feel enormous loneliness in my teenage years. I think subconsciously I saw education and a career as being the way out. And it was, but in the price of that or the cost of that was that my relationships, particularly in my earlier adult years, really weren't as deep and powerful as they should have been.
Can you speak more on that, those relationships?
Well, yeah, I didn't have the ability to really open up. And I think intimacy is more than just physical intimacy. It's that ability to communicate with another human being at a really honest spiritual level. And, for me, that didn't happen very much early on. I was too, I guess I had a protective barrier around me, and I was too into driving a career, being successful, being economically self-sufficient. And I didn't realize that actually one of the beauties, or probably the greatest beauty of being a human being, is that ability to connect at a very honest, intimate level with other human beings.
I love that. That's such a beautiful realization. Congratulations on coming to that awareness, because how many of us are feeling absolutely disconnected from others and particularly from ourselves and not understanding where that feeling of inner angst even comes from. So, Peter, you reached a point of success in your investment banking career, which would have seen many of your peers, I imagine, just sit back on their laurels and go, well, from now on, I'm just going to play golf and go on cruises around the Caribbean. That wasn't your path. You made a major change from that environment. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, well, I mean, the first thing is I did far better in investment banking than I would have ever thought possible. I kept breaking through glass ceilings and surprised myself in terms of how successful I became as an investment banker. But as I became more successful, I started to realize that something was missing. And what was missing was the fact that, my father, when I was young, was very community conscious, and he taught me to be as well, and I'd forgotten all of that. And so what I started to do was reach out to not-for-profits and start to support them in a big way. And the more I did that, the more addictive I found it. And I suppose it's addictive because when you work in the social sector, firstly, you see people whose circumstances are way, 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 way worse than your own. And my circumstances were good. Secondly, you realize that but for the grace of God, you could have been one of those people. You could have spiraled down. And thirdly, it gave me the benefit of realizing that sort of deep inside me, there's goodness and there's care for other people. So I was getting, as an addict does, I was getting that sort of feedback constantly. And the more I got, the more I wanted that feedback. So the more involved I got in the sector. until suddenly, I'd given up my traditional work, my investment banking career, just to focus full time on the sector and hopefully doing some good along the way.
And it's interesting that you described it as a form of addiction. Was it, do you use that word because ultimately it wasn't fulfilling you, or tell me a little bit more about that?
No, I'm using that term because if you think about the classic addict, they take something because they actually get a positive reaction from it. So in a sense, what they're doing is rational. The problem is that they lose control and they get completely addicted, and their whole life becomes immersed in that. In my case, I was addicted in a really positive way. That actually the feedback it was giving me was a really positive reinforcement of the fact that as a human being, the most important thing in life is that community connection and that capacity to have intimacy. And I don't mean physical intimacy, I just mean intimacy with other human beings, and to realize that some human beings, through no fault of their own, have been unlucky in life. And if you've been lucky like I have and other people have been unlucky, why not try and do your bit to actually even out as best you can that luck? So I'm using the term addictive, perhaps others would use a different term, but it's ready to say that there was constant reinforcement that if you get out there and you help others, you're actually helping yourself at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, we can't ignore the title of this show, Wake the F Up. There was a moment when you and Tanya did just that. You ventured into a territory that must have seemed a bit scary at first. Can you tell us your first experience, or maybe both experiences, with psilocybin? Why did you want to go there, and what did you get from it?
Yeah, well, look, the first point I'd make is that when we first took psilocybin, we'd already started 4 charities between us, and we'd sworn we'd never start a 5th because it's actually really, really hard work. But what happened was that Tanya discovered an article in the New Yorker, and it was a Michael Pollan article before he wrote that amazing book. And it was all about a trial done by New York University with people who had a terminal illness, had depression and anxiety because of that, had taken psilocybin, and suddenly the depression and anxiety had gone away for most of them. One of the patients in that study was a Holocaust survivor. And Tanya's Jewish, and like I think so many Jewish people, she carries the burden of what happened to the Jews in the Second World War. And she got interested, and when Tanya gets interested, she's almost obsessive. And what she did is she talked to researchers around the world and tried to get us into a psilocybin trial. We couldn't because we don't have a known mental illness. But we were referred to somebody, a therapist in Holland. And so we went to Holland and we went through the experience. And I have to say that before I took the capsule, I really hadn't given it any thought. I just got along because I love and trust my wife, and she was so keen to do it. In the first half an hour, I have to say it was a disappointment because nothing happened. And I thought, what's this all about? And then suddenly you start to see those amazing shapes. And I say see because your eyes are closed, so it's in your mind, those psychedelic shapes. And I thought, that's pretty nice. But again, if this is all it is, it's sort of nice. And then suddenly I was transported into another world. And in that other world, I became just an observer. So it was no longer Peter Hunt. It was just somebody observing what was happening. And I had no control over the experiences. And it was just extraordinary. And I came out of that experience just completely transported and realizing that our understanding of life and consciousness is so narrow. I also came out of that experience feeling incredibly connected. And hey, when you think about it, what's the definition of depression? It's disconnection. So you start to see the linkages between that experience and people getting well through these therapies.
Yeah, it sounds amazing. And I've heard the process is described as basically reconnecting synapses neural connections that were always there and that we had ever since, birth as young children, when we really did have that sense of wonder. And then progressively, as we don't need them to survive, they get closed down. So it's like just an opening of what's already there. Did you experience that childlike sense of wonder, Peter? Is that what it was like?
Oh, yeah. I can remember part of it, feeling incredibly thirsty and saying I was thirsty to the therapist. And he kept saying, drink some water. And I said, no, I'm actually experiencing thirst and I'm really into this. And I'm really feeling what it feels like to be thirsty and tasting the thirst. And we don't do that in our environment. If we feel thirsty, we grab a drink. We don't really indulge the experience and really feel it. And it was extraordinary. It's like all the controls, the programmings that take place in our brain to make us feel secure had fallen away. And it sounds a bit corny, but it's like you're exposed to the universe. There's no time, there's no particular space, there's no control over where you go. There's just being immersed into this extraordinary experience of just being part of everything. Very exciting. Now, you're right. If you look at what was happening to Peter Hunter under an fMRI scan, what you're going to see is all sorts of reconnections taking place in the brain, massive neurogenesis. But I didn't know that was happening. All I knew was that I was going through this wondrous experience where I felt connected with everything.
Thank you for sharing that, Peter, because I've listened to a lot of podcasts on this topic and no one seems to have actually described what it's like. And it's so frustrating. You're taken all the way to the brink, but then you're left hanging. And so after you'd experienced this, did it have an ongoing effect on how you interrelated with people and engaged in life?
Yeah, because one of the things it does is it just makes you much, much more thoughtful. In my case, much more empathic to other people. I'm much more aware that we are more than just physical bodies, that, we communicate not just with sight or with sound, but we communicate through energy as well. And you just become much more aware of that. And you also become, when you're a child, and you mentioned it, you have all the wonder of being and wonder in small things. And it recreates that wonder in the world and in life. And hey, if you've got depression, you've lost that wonder. What an amazing gift to give to somebody, to recreate that wonder of being a child in the body of an adult.
Yes, with all the wisdom gained over the course of a lifetime as well. Yeah. It's like a double bounty, isn't it? So I gather that this was so powerful for you that this is really what propelled you then to do the work you're now doing with Mind Medicine Australia. Can you speak about that and some of the results that have been gained in the treatment of depression?
The first point I'd make there is that we didn't do that immediately. It took us 12 months before we wanted our second psilocybin experience. And hey, if anything proves that this stuff isn't addictive, it's the fact it took us 12 months to have our second experience. And that's what trials confirm, by the way. But having had the second experiences, it was like, well, we've got to make this available through our medical system to people who really need it. So we set up Mind Medicine Australia. And the whole purpose of Mind Medicine Australia is to make psychedelic-assisted therapies part of our medical system. So if you as a patient have depression, between you and your doctor, you'll go through the alternatives that are available, most of which, by the way, aren't very good. One of the alternatives you'll discuss is psychedelic-assisted therapies. And if you and your doctor agree, you'll go and do psychedelic-assisted therapies. So we're not trying to get in the way of the patient-doctor relationship, but we do want people to be properly informed. Now, the reason for that is that in overseas trials, and there have now been an enormous number of them, dating back to the 1950s, but a lot in the last 15 years. And what they show fundamentally are two things. Firstly, psilocybin and MDMA, because MDMA is used for PTSD, are incredibly safe when they're used in a medically controlled environment by trained physicians. Incredibly safe. The second thing all these trials show is that remission rates are somewhere between 60 and 80% for people with treatment-resistant depression or treatment-resistant PTSD. Now, here's the comparison. Today, with existing therapies, if you've got depression, you've probably got at best a 35% chance of getting well, at best. And you may get all sorts of nasty side effects with the pharmaceuticals. If you've got PTSD, you've got at best a 5 to 10% chance of getting well. So the differences in terms of treatment outcomes is extraordinary. I mean, this needs to be part of our medical system, and there needs to be a sense of urgency about it.
Oh, definitely. And you shared with me a really devastating statistic the other day when we were talking about this, Peter, about the number of suicides in Australia. Can you just go back to there just to emphasise the urgency of this problem?
Yeah, well, suicides have been going up in Australia pre-COVID, and now it's getting even worse. We have some of the worst mental health statistics in the world. When you talk about suicide, I mean, suicides are happening because we haven't got adequate treatments for people who get really desperate. So for every day that we wait for these therapies, people are going to die. So there really needs to be a sense of urgency here. And what we keep imploring the government to do is take this seriously. The governments keep talking about the importance of mental health. They're ploughing a fortune into the mental health system, but they seem to focus on all of the procedural stuff, making it more efficient, better patient access gateways, a more efficient system, all that sort of stuff. When the real elephant in the room, and it's a massive elephant, is that actually the treatments that we have aren't very good. Yeah. And there's been precious little innovation in the sector now for about 50 years.
Yeah, I know my dad was a doctor in a totally different field. He was a surgeon and otologist, but he said the same thing. The thing that's most severely lacking from medicine is creativity and imagination, because they're so process driven and so tradition based that it's created its own problem. And I see living in Bali, which is a totally different social structure from the Western model, based on community and tribes. Because there's not that same sense of disconnection that you talked about. People are connected here. It's a gossip economy. Everyone knows what everyone's doing, but you see it in the differing level of happiness. They're not pushed to achieve like we are in the Western world to kind of prove ourselves to be worthy via external validation. They're just happy living their lives, in constant interchange with each other. And it's such a lesson. But, if there's somehow that we can achieve that through something that seems like it doesn't really have a big downside, it really is a matter of huge urgency. And there can only be a win-win even from a government perspective, because this kind of treatment is only going to have positive impacts on productivity, isn't it? It's not as if you experience this and then you want to go out and stare at your navel for the rest of your life on a mountaintop. It doesn't have that effect, does it, Peter?
No, that's the beauty of it. I mean, you get back to your normal life, but you get back to your normal life feeling much more comfortable with existence, with some wonder in the world, and with this feeling of connectivity. And that's why it's so important, by the way, for people to realize it's not the medicines alone that do this. You've got to combine the medicines with psychotherapy, and the purpose of psychotherapy is to help you take that feeling of connection back into your normal life.
Yeah, how to then integrate it into life ongoing. Well, that's fascinating. And before we finish, I will get you to share details on how to contact you and how to get in touch with your organisation. Before we do that, you and I operate in a very similar sphere, but totally in different ways. But I think the vision that we have is probably a shared one, that it's a low tolerance for unnecessary suffering. If there's a way that we can get people to feel at peace with themselves so that they can be highly functioning and living lives that are fulfilling, then why not bring that on sooner rather than later? And the work that you're doing is so valuable. So if I had a giant generator and I could be propelling you along and all those government decision makers are helping them wake the F up, I would be doing it. Maybe they need to be the next guests on the show. But in the meantime, one of the things I do, of course, I work in a different way to the same end, is to help people bring to the surface anything that has been stopping them from feeling connected with others. And usually this can be traced back to a disconnection with the self. So what we experience on the outside world really mirrors our inner world. So I asked you, Peter, to complete this assessment called the Magic Triangle Quiz. With a view to just showing people how many different ways and tools there are to become aware, to wake up. And so just to explain how this works, in this assessment, basically you're given a set of options of things that you would identify as core needs. So there are over 200 or so. And in a process of elimination, you choose your top three. And I'm going to go through these with you now, Peter, so you have an understanding of what these mean for you in your life going forward. So to benefit from this work, whether it's psilocybin or the work I do, I'd like to preface it by saying you don't have to necessarily be in a chronic state of depression or anxiety or PTSD. What the vision I see, and I think you mentioned this the other day, Peter, when we spoke, is that this is universalized, so it's for everyone. Would you agree?
Yeah, very much so.
Everyone could benefit from this, yeah.
And I should say, by the way, that our immediate objective is to make these substances part of our medical system.
Yeah.
But once that's done and people get comfortable, we really should have licensed retreats where somebody who doesn't suffer from mental illness can go to that retreat, can have licensed therapists there to make sure they're safe and secure, and then go through these extraordinary experiences, because those experiences make us better people, make us more thoughtful people. And why would you stop people having that experience, provided it's done in a safe environment?
Precisely. And I think in the absence of that being available, people will find their own way to access it, not under medical supervision. And that has different consequences potentially. So what you're talking about makes so much more sense. So going to the Magic Triangle assessment, and basically, so what you came up with were three core needs. And imagining that there's a triangle, a triangle that points upwards. And at the base of the triangle are the second and third core needs, one being spirituality and the other one love. And then at the top of the triangle was light. Now, when you see those three words, you might go, well, what the hell does that mean? What's interesting about needs as against value? So a value is something that you actively embrace, that's part of your system. It reflects what you think, what you do, what you say, ideally, if you're aligned with your values. And need, however, is interesting because it's something that still partly sits outside and draws you because it's something that you want more of. And why this is interesting is that it's informed by our pain. So in other words, anything that we have as a core need, we have experienced the lack of. So in the same way that, in Europe in particular, maybe not so much in Australia, they really crave the long, hot summer because they've experienced the long, dark winter. Yet without that winter, summer wouldn't hold the same appeal. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yeah. So that's really the nature of the need, that it speaks to something that's been experienced as a lack. So what I'd invite you to do now, Peter, is just talk to me about each of those needs. We'll start with spirituality. Tell me about spirituality. What does that mean for you, and why did it emerge as one of the top three?
Yeah, well, the first thing is it doesn't mean for me traditional religion. Although I have enormous respect for people who take their religions as a central component of their life. What it means is this wonder, this embracing the energy that's all around us, which is mysterious, but it actually is more than the physical. It's realizing that human beings are metaphysical. We're creatures of consciousness, not just physical beings. And it's also realizing that there's a wonder around us that we can tap into and we can learn from. And it doesn't happen by reading books. It happens just by being part of this, of a spiritual environment. So it's going beyond the need for the physical. It's going beyond disciplined mental thinking.
Yeah.
It's just feeling this energy around us and feeling the wonder of that energy. It's stunning.
Yeah. And what I'm hearing from that, thank you for that beautiful definition, is that unlike science, it's not applied. It's something that's drawn from within. Is that how you would see it?
It's almost a circle. It comes from within, which brings it from without, which comes back within. It's like, I don't think it exists in a physical body. And I think we are more than our physical bodies.
Yeah.
And in fact, if you look at the energy around us and you do those scans, the scans actually show that our energy actually goes way, way beyond our physical body. So it's that connection with everything around us, which is within us, but it's also outside of us. It's that wonderful virtuous circle.
Yeah. Thank you. So the next core need was love. So again, speak to me about love. What does that mean for you? There's so many interpretations of this word. So what does it mean for you, Peter?
It's seeing the beauty in life. It's seeing that, you know, every human being, every animal, every plant, it's seeing the wonder and the beauty of that, and just feeling that deep inside. If you like, it's the companion of spirituality. It's that feeling that it's the feeling of something so powerful that it takes over your being in a way that money, physical needs never can.
Wow. And I love the fact that you're saying this, such a beautiful definition, again, from the context of being so involved in the financial world. That's very powerful. Thank you.
Historically.
The final one, so the one that emerged at the top of the triangle, it's almost like the star on the Christmas tree, is light. Speak to me about that. How do you interpret light?
I mean lightness of being. And by that I mean, you know, we go through our daily lives and we get disrupted by a whole raft of things that really aren't important. And they tend to drag us down. And we're seeing that big time in this COVID pandemic, where people are getting very, very stressed. Lightness of being is realizing that to be alive is such a privilege, it's such a wonder, or should be such a privilege and such a wonder. And just to feel that every day and recognize that there's reciprocity here. That feeling of wonder carries with it the need to actually help and love other people. Doesn't mean you've got to like them, by the way, because people get confused between liking something and loving something. You can love somebody without particularly liking them, simply because they're part of this wonderful world that we live in and this wonderful consciousness that we're privileged to be part of. And it's that sense of respect and recognizing that so many of the things that drag us down aren't important. Be light, because in lightness comes love, comes spirituality, and comes this need to reach out and help other people.
So it's really the umbrella, isn't it, above everything? And so thank you for sharing that. Now that sits there as the core need, and to really anchor this, one way to anchor something is to understand how important it is. And one way to understand the importance of something is to realize the cost of losing it. So what I'd like you to do now, Peter, is imagine you've got light sitting on your right-hand side and you flip 180 degrees to the left where you see the opposite of light. And can you tell me what word comes up for you there? How would you describe the opposite of light?
But it's horrible. It's darkness. It's being so enamored by your own problems that you're unable to see the sheer beauty and the wonder of being alive and the sheer gift of being alive and sharing that gift with as many people as you can. You know, there was an amazing lady in Africa whose name I can't quite recall. In her dying days, she gave a speech and she said that before she died, she wanted to reach out and touch as many hands as she possibly could. And to me, that sort of expressed what I'm trying to say, that being alive is so powerful and it's such a gift, but it's a gift we can all share. And we can reach out to those who have had less luck, frankly, than I've had, and share some of our luck with them. And hey, if we all did that, what a world we'd live in. And how proud would we be as parents and as human beings.
Well, what you have here is a vision of that world. You've just articulated it. I love that term, being so enamored of our own problems, because that describes perfectly the victim space, doesn't it? But you must have known that. You've known that darkness, haven't you, in your life, to be able to define the light. Would that be right?
No, I've been in very dark places.
Yeah.
And I've had challenges, but
yeah. So this is the power of what you've just defined, because of course you had to know those dark places to know the value of light. So how the triangle works is it basically clarifies your why, your what, and your how. And I'll just explain how that works. So your why is the thing that's most important to you because it's the one that has been attached to the greatest amount of pain. So let's say that's that definition of darkness that you just gave us, where you're enamored with your own problems. There's no gratitude in being alive. The joy of life has been sucked out of the system. So that is what so many people are experiencing right now, as you know. And the pain of that, when you do something as you're doing now, the work you're putting out into the world, you transmute the pain of that into passion. So this is really your passion. Passion fuels the why. So why is your light? So if we were to articulate that, it might be, if you were to articulate your vision, it might be along the lines of, to help people caught up in their own dark tunnel, see that there's a light at the end of it. Does that make sense?
Yep. Yeah.
So that's the why. And then we go down to the base. So the base of the triangle is the foundation. It's through the achieving of these base needs that you will achieve your vision, basically. So the vision is actualized by the mission. The two base needs, which are spirituality and love, the pursuit of those are what will enable you to help people get to the end of their dark tunnel and see that light. So that brings us to the what, and which is spirituality. And this is interesting. So what you're bringing is a spiritual approach to something that's been traditionally put in the hands of science and medicine. So this is the game changer. That's your what. And your how is you do it through the love of, or you describe that as the beauty that you see in each one. You have the ability to see the potential of every human being, the beauty within them, and the love of that, and the love of the idea of them being able to see, feel love themselves is your how. That's how you do it. And you're even doing it through a labor of love, a non-profit organization. So that's really what that magic triangle's telling you, that light is the vision. That's your why. What you bring to the table is a spiritual approach in a domain that's traditionally been driven by numbers and science. And the how you do that is through your love of others and the potential you see in them. Does that clarify? Is that helpful?
Yeah, no, I found the whole experience very thought-provoking. And for those who don't know how it works, you start off with lots and lots of words that could be needs, and you're asked to put down 50 of them as needs, and then it's 30 or whatever the number is, and then it's 20, and then it's 10, and then it starts getting a bit harder, and then suddenly it's 3. And it's fascinating for me how that transposed to those 3. So thank you.
That's my pleasure, because I know we talk a lot about find your why, but very few people actually inform us how we can do it. But I feel that the most reliable source or guidance that we can go to is our own pain. And if we can tap into that, and the pain of darkness, you've known that's really what created the need for light. And that's what you're pursuing. And the beautiful thing about this is ultimately the thing you pursue for yourself is what you have to give to others. That becomes your gift. That's how the pain turns into the gift. And if we can turn that pain into a gift, as you said before, Peter, by healing others, we heal ourselves. And that's when we get to a state of being at peace with our past, because we realize there was almost a predetermined aspect to it, that this was the path that you had to take. Yeah. So thank you so much for being open to doing that exercise. I really appreciate that. And now, Peter, I'd like to invite you to just share how people get in touch with you. Can they get in? How can they get involved with Mind Medicine Australia? What are the opportunities out there aside from actually undergoing a treatment? Are there other opportunities to get involved with the work that you're doing?
As I mentioned before, we've got a situation where we have a massive mental health epidemic getting worse by the day. We have treatment options that actually aren't that good for many Australians, and a lack of innovation in the sector. What we're trying to do is shift the paradigm so that the medical community have at their disposal an extraordinary tool for patients, psychedelic-assisted therapy, a decision made between the doctor and the patient. To do that, we have 4 components to the strategy. The first component is awareness building. So discussions like this, we have a major summit, COVID willing, scheduled for November. We do webinars almost weekly. It's all about building the case so that we get real understanding and momentum in the community for change. The second thing we're doing is we're training therapists, so psychiatrists, psychologists, other therapists, to do these therapies, because you've actually got to know how to work with people in altered states. And we're training about 100 this year, 200 next year, so it'll keep building up. The third thing is we're working with universities on a centre of excellence to really explore just how far we can take these treatments. And the final thing is all the mechanics of making these part of our medical system. Changing the legal system, providing the right ethical framework, the protocols, manufacturing the medicines, all those things that are necessary for these to be used safely as part of our medical system to get more and more people well. So when you think about it, what an opportunity to change a paradigm with relatively small amounts of money compared to the size of the problem. So firstly, it's easy to connect with me. It's peter@mymedicineaustralia.org, or you can go onto our website and connect through the website. Second thing I'd love people listening to this to do is go onto our website, look at the Learn section, and really go up the learning curve with these therapies, and then talk to everyone you meet about why they should be part of our medical system. The third thing is volunteer. And the fourth thing is donate. I mean, we're a charity and not-for-profit. Tanya and I are personally putting in a lot of financial support into this charity, and we've got some wonderful donors, both large and small. But the more funding we can have, the more we can do. And as you said earlier on, Janet, there needs to be a sense of urgency about change. If people are dying, people are living miserable lives because of mental illness. We have to change this system. Get behind us and be part of that change. We also, I should say, have chapters around Australia and New Zealand. So become a chapter member as well, and you will find around you some amazing people. And how you do that again is on our website. So get involved. Together we really can build awareness, build momentum, and change Australia. And indeed, with other like-minded organisations around the world, change the world in terms of getting many more people well and able to lead fruitful, beautiful lives, which should be their entitlement.
Peter, thank you so much. You really are the living light. That core need is emanating from you. You're just a leading light in this space, and it's been such a privilege to spend this time with you. Thank you. And I'm sure just giving so much hope to people, even if it's not available right now, knowing that it's not far away. There's so much pressure on this. There's so much positive outcome to come from this. So much upside, so little downside. It seems only a matter of time. So hoping that time is very, very compressed. So thank you very much for being such a wonderful guest on Wake the F Up.
It's been a pleasure.
You have just listened to another enlightening episode of Wake the F Up with Janet Hogan. To find out more about the breakthrough guided way to get off the hamster wheel and seize a life of freedom and fulfillment, visit janethogan.com/podcast for access to the show notes and to learn more about Janet's breakthrough work. Just remember, finding your true path isn't potluck, it's a process. Until next time.